For my wife's birthday, I paid for a week at an expensive spa hotel in Palm Springs. I told her I couldn't come because of work. She looked upset. 2 days later, I decided to surprise her. I secretly bought a ticket on her flight to show up in her room with a bouquet of roses. But the surprise was waiting for me. I'd been late getting home most nights for about a year. Maybe more. Claire would say she was lonely, and I'd say I knew. And then I'd open my laptop on the kitchen counter, and that would be the end of it. 10 years of marriage, and that was where we lived now. Me in the kitchen, her in the bedroom. Both of us pretending the door between us wasn't closed. So when her birthday came up, the big one, I wanted to do something. I booked her a week at a place in Palm Springs. The kind of place you see in magazines. Massages, mud baths, a pool that runs the length of the building. I told her I couldn't come with her. Said I had a meeting at the warehouse, I couldn't move. She kissed me on the cheek and said it was the nicest thing anyone had ever done for her. That same afternoon, I booked my own ticket. Same flight, last row. I called the florist and asked them to overnight the white roses she loved, the ones with the long stems, to the front desk of the hotel. Walked into the bedroom while she was packing and watched her fold things into her suitcase. She had a new swimsuit. She'd been to the salon. She looked like a woman who was going somewhere. I didn't know yet that she was. I just thought she was happy. I sat in the last row of the plane and pulled my baseball cap low. Claire was up in row 11, where I'd booked her seat. I could see the top of her head from where I was. Every couple of minutes, she'd pick up her phone, look at it, put it back down, then pick it up again. She wasn't reading anything. She was waiting for something. I figured it was the spa app, checking on her appointments. I told myself a lot of things on that flight. When we landed, she didn't get up to grab her bag. She let 2 people pass her first. She kept her face turned to the window. I'd been married to this woman for a decade, and I'd never once seen her do that. Claire was the kind of person who stood up before the seatbelt sign went off. I let her get off first. I waited until the last person from her row was in the jetway, then I followed. At baggage claim, I stood behind a column. She was already there, watching the carousel, holding her phone in both hands like it might warm her. I almost walked up to her then, wrapped my arms around her from behind. I'd been imagining her face for 2 days. The look she'd give me when she realized I was here. But something in the way she was standing made me wait. So I waited. Her bag came off the belt. She didn't move toward it. She was still watching the doors. That's when I should have known. He came in through the sliding doors maybe 10 minutes after she did. Pulled a small black suitcase behind him, the kind that fits in the overhead bin. He didn't look around the way you look around when you're meeting someone for the first time. He walked straight to her. She didn't run to him. She didn't even smile, not really. She just turned a little, like she'd been expecting him to be there, and he leaned in and said something quiet next to her ear. She nodded. He took the handle of her suitcase from her, and they walked toward the doors together. I want to be honest about this part because it matters. They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. From 20 feet away, they could have been 2 grown people who'd worked on a project together and run into each other at the airport. That was what I needed to believe, because the other option was already trying to climb up my throat, and I wasn't ready to let it in. He was about my age. Gray at the temples. Expensive watch. Carried himself like a man who was used to rooms turning to look at him. I followed them out at a distance and watched them split up at the curb. She got into a hotel shuttle. He got into a black car waiting at the second lane. Coincidence, I thought. People go to Palm Springs in the spring. The plane was full. I rode the next shuttle alone. The whole way to the hotel, I kept seeing the way she'd nodded at him. The hotel was that kind of place where the lobby smells like cucumber water and nobody asks you twice if you want a porter. I walked up to the desk in my windbreaker with the roses wrapped in paper in one hand and gave my name. The woman smiled and slid a key card across the marble. Said the suite was on the 7th floor, the one looking out at the mountain. I took the elevator up alone. Rehearsed it in my head. I'd knock. She'd open the door and stand there for half a second with her mouth open. And then she'd start to cry, the good kind of crying. And I'd hand her the roses and she'd laugh into my chest. I'd booked her a week of being taken care of for her 40th birthday, and I was about to give her the rest of it in person. I got to the door. The latch was thrown over the strike plate, so the door couldn't close. The light from inside spilled into the hallway in a strip across the carpet. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. He came out of the bathroom in a white robe, toweling his hair. He didn't see me at first. He was looking toward the bed, where Claire was sitting on the edge in her own robe, brushing her wet hair. He said, Babe, can you grab me the other one? This one's damp. She lifted her head. She saw me. I walked to the writing desk. I set the roses down on it. The paper crinkled. I said, got it. I turned around and I left. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs, 7 flights, with my carry-on banging against my shin all the way down. I walked out of the lobby, got into the next cab, and asked the driver to take me to any hotel that wasn't this one. The room down the road was a chain place by the highway. I dropped onto the edge of the bed and let the phone vibrate on the nightstand. 8 times. 11 texts. A voicemail 2 minutes long. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it. By midnight, I should have booked a flight home. I didn't. At 8 the next morning, I was at the bar of her hotel, sitting at the far end with a cup of coffee, watching the lobby. I knew he'd come down sooner or later. Men like that don't skip breakfast. He came out of the elevator at 9:20 in a navy jacket, alone. He walked to the bar and sat 3 stools from me and ordered an espresso. He didn't see me yet. He was looking at his phone. I picked up my coffee and moved to the stool next to him. He turned. He saw me. His face did the thing faces do when the body knows before the mind does. He didn't say a word. I didn't either. Neither of us moved for maybe 20 seconds. Then he looked at the bartender, dropped a folded bill on the counter, and walked out without his espresso. I finished my coffee. I left a tip. I went to the airport. I came home on the 4 o'clock flight that afternoon. The house was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Her shoes were by the door. Her coffee cup was still in the sink from the morning she'd left. I poured the cold coffee down the drain. I rinsed the cup. I put it in the cabinet upside down. Roy was an old friend from before the marriage. We'd known each other since high school. I called him on Wednesday and asked if he could meet me for dinner somewhere quiet. He picked a place outside town we used to go to when we were both single, a steakhouse off the highway with low lights and booths that swallowed you up. He let me get most of the way through my drink before he said anything. Then he just said, "Okay, tell me." I told him. I kept it short. The hotel. The man in the robe. I described him. Gray at the temples. Expensive watch. The kind of guy who looked like he owned a boat. Roy went quiet. He set his glass down very slowly. He said, "I have to tell you something. I saw her with that guy about 5 months back. Tuesday night, place over in Kirkland. I figured he was someone from her circle. A co-worker or a friend's husband. I figured you knew." He looked at me. He said, "I should have called." I looked down at the table. I said his name, quiet, just to make sure. "Benson." Roy nodded. He said, "That's what she called him." I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was cold. I needed air on my face. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I wasn't surprised anymore. I was starting to understand everything. I dropped into a chair at the kitchen table and let my head do the work I'd been keeping it from doing for a week. The conference in Phoenix last September. She'd come back with a tan she said was from the hotel pool, but you couldn't get from a hotel pool. The wellness weekend in Sedona in February. She'd told me her friend Megan had paid for it as a birthday gift, but Megan never paid for anything in her life. The 2 nights in San Diego the week before Easter for some certification thing I didn't understand and didn't ask about, because I never asked about anything anymore. Every one of those weekends, I'd been at the warehouse, or at a vendor meeting, or buried in some quarterly thing that couldn't wait. I wasn't checking receipts. I was just remembering. Once I started, I couldn't stop. Her hair that smelled like a different shampoo. A bracelet I never noticed. A new way she said, "I'm fine," when I'd ask if she was tired. And then the Whitman fundraiser. The big one downtown, the one with the silent auction. October before last. I'd hated going. I'd argued with her in the kitchen about my tie. I'd sat next to 2 people from the Chamber of Commerce all night and barely looked across the table. That's where I'd seen him, right across from me, that whole evening. The photo box was in the closet in the den, on a shelf I hadn't touched in 2 years. I pulled it down at 3 in the morning and dumped everything onto the rug. We'd had a photographer at the Whitman thing. A woman with a digital camera who'd emailed Claire a folder afterward. Claire had printed her favorites and put them in this box. I found them at the bottom. Maybe a dozen prints. There we were at our table. There was Claire in the dark green dress she'd bought for the night. There was me, with my tie crooked. In almost every picture, I was looking at my phone. And when I was laughing at something one of the chamber people was saying, Claire wasn't in that frame. She was on the other side of the table. And there was Benson, in every picture, sitting across from Claire, leaning a little forward, his hand on his wine glass. In one shot, he was saying something, and she was laughing with her head tipped back. I'd been 3 feet away. I'd been turned the other direction. There was a shot the photographer took from behind the auction table. You could see most of our table from that angle. Claire was leaning down to her purse. Benson was leaning down too, on his side, his phone in his hand. The angle of them was the same. Two people exchanging a number across a tablecloth without anyone in the room knowing. I held those photos a long time. What she did, she did. I picked out 3 of the clearest shots and slid them into a manila envelope. I sealed it and set it on the corner of the kitchen counter. She came back on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen when I heard her key in the front door. She stood in the doorway with her suitcase behind her, her face already arranged for the fight she'd been rehearsing all week. I'd had a week too. I told her to sit down at the table. I slid the envelope across to her. She opened it. She looked at the top photo. She knew which night it was. I said, I was on the plane with you. I was the man at the door with the roses. She started to talk. I held up one finger, and she stopped. I said, I want a divorce. She put her face in her hands. She didn't make any noise. She just stayed there with her hands over her eyes for a while. She lifted her head. She looked at me like she was waiting for the next part, the part where I'd shake her or curse her or throw something. There wasn't a next part. I'd said the thing I'd come to say. I stood up from the table, and I went out to the garage. I leaned against the workbench. After a few minutes, I heard her crying upstairs. It was the first time I'd ever heard her cry like that. I didn't go up. A week later, I heard from a guy in Roy's circle that Benson's wife had filed. Someone had sent her a folder. I never asked who. We had to stay in the house together for almost a month while the paperwork went through. I slept in the guest room. She kept to the bedroom. We crossed each other in the kitchen in the morning and the hallway at night. We talked about the water bill and nothing else. A week in, the doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I got there first. A kid in a green polo was standing on the porch with a big bouquet of red roses. He read the name on his clipboard. Claire's name. I signed for them. Claire came down the stairs when she heard the door. She stopped halfway. She'd seen the flowers in my hand. I walked past her into the kitchen. I opened the trash can with my foot. I dropped the roses in on top of the coffee grounds and closed the lid. I turned around and looked at her. I said, "Tell him to deliver them in person next time." She didn't say anything. She turned and walked back upstairs. On the day she left, she came down with 2 big bags and stood in the front hall. Her voice was small. "I'm sorry." She nodded once. She walked out. The door closed soft behind her. The house stayed in my name. She took what she'd brought into the marriage, and not a dollar more. You'll ask me whether anything could have been done, whether it could have gone any other way. Sometimes love doesn't end the night you find out. Sometimes it ends a long time before that. You just don't notice when. You never know what's going to happen next. I wanted to surprise my wife for her birthday, showed up with flowers, thinking we'd go out to a nice restaurant. Instead, I got a real-life drama. Painful, but liberating. Thanks for the likes. Subscribe. There are many more untold stories to come.